All right, guys, welcome back to another edition of In the Lounge. My name's Justin Rowan, filling in for Phil Boileau, running a two-man weave with my man, Marc Griffin. Marc, how are you doing today?
Well, you know what? Hosted. This is the first time you've hosted, man. And for everybody on YouTube, the photo is Phil, but it's really Justin. He's doing a bit of a face-off, Nick Cage, John Travolta style. It's been a really interesting week, man. I want to bring up something right off the bat. Kobe Bryant, what the heck do you do with this guy? What is going on with this man, this machine?
Well, I believe it was Jay Adonde that wrote about it this week, saying that really this season is the perfect situation for the Lakers because the way Kobe's playing, there's basically no chance that he'd want to come back next year. And if he were to want to come back next year, they're basically obligated, just based on the history that they have with him, to bring him back, even if it was a more reasonable salary. At this point, he's just kind of disruptive to what the Lakers are trying to build. They're between eras right now, and I guess you just kind of live with it. On the plus side, it seems like Kobe is shooting them into a position where they're going to have a top 3 pick, which means they retain it. If the pick is 4 or lower, it goes to the Sixers. So who knows? Maybe they're going to have another top prospect. But obviously nothing's guaranteed in the lottery, even if you do have the worst record. So it's ugly right now, though. It's really ugly. I don't understand Byron Scott not playing D'Angelo Russell in fourth quarters. Yeah, I mean, as bad as he's been, rookies are bad. Andrew Wiggins was bad last year to start the beginning of the year. And, I mean, even as the season progressed, he put up numbers, but he made a ton of mistakes. That's what rookies do. They have to acknowledge that the team's future isn't in Kobe Bryant and need to start giving more minutes to these young guys, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and Nate Jones made a good point that, two good points, that if they cut him, he gets paid. That's one option. And another thing is that these young guys could freeze him out at some point during the season, which I compare to, if you've ever seen the Band of Brothers, what the guys did to David Schwimmer when he stopped leading and was not doing things well. I think that can eventually happen with these guys, and that's something you really haven't seen this league, but you really haven't seen this weird situation where a coach is letting a guy do whatever he wants just based on legacy alone and a paycheck, but just like you said, really, really ugly basketball, man.
Yeah, I don't think cutting him would be an option just based on how, let's call it, passionate Kobe Bryant fans are. Basically Kobe's the one thing they have to identify themselves with at this point, and the only real source of pride, because when you're looking at things in Lakerland, it's rough. I mean, the team's been bad for a while. They have some promising young guys, but they're not really performing just yet. So having Kobe Bryant on their team is kind of the one thing they can point to and be like, okay, this is why I'm a Laker fan. So cutting him doesn't seem feasible.
Let's talk Jahlil, because he's been in all kinds of trouble. The speeding ticket issue came out this morning, but a couple of rumbles outside of games. I mean, what do you think is going on with this young guy?
I think he's just a little bit immature. I don't think he's necessarily a bad kid. But this is part of my problem with Philly. I think when you don't put any veterans in the locker room, it's really, really tough, both on court and off court, to develop guys properly. Bad habits are formed. There's a lack of accountability. I'm not saying you have to sign a veteran that's going to help you win. That would obviously be counterproductive to what their plan is, as controversial as it is. But I mean, and I can recall the Cavs doing this. They traded for Luke Walton because they noticed that they didn't have the right type of veterans. Now, that's a guy that's probably not going to help you win a lot of games, but I mean, his leadership was highly touted at that point. We're obviously seeing him be very successful in a head coaching role right now. But you need veterans around these guys to say, hey, no, we're not going to the bar tonight, or no, you're not getting involved in a bar fight, and making sure that they're doing the right things in practice. When Nick Stauskas is basically one of the older veterans on the team, you're in a lot of trouble. Yeah, I mean, he's only a veteran because he spent a lot of years in college. I mean, everybody's pretty fresh to the NBA. You don't have a veteran presence there, and I think we're starting to see some of the effects of that.
Yeah, and I got to mention there, I think Flip Saunders' model, bringing in 3 vets, one kind of for each position, has been doing wonders for Minnesota. Like KG saying, the beast he's seeing in Cat. I wanted to bring up Cat just for a second. He has not been playing fourth quarters this week. What do you think's going on there?
I really don't know. I don't understand the rationale behind that. Not only is he part of the future, and like I said, with the Lakers, I think he should be playing those young guys even if they make mistakes. But he's been one of their best players this season. I really, really don't understand the rationale behind that. I know some of it is he is prone to fouls. So sometimes him sitting can be a result of just being in foul trouble. And then, I mean, once a guy's on the bench and you have a unit out there that's producing and playing well, sometimes you'll leave a lesser player in just because of how the chemistry is going. Like you want to stay on that role. I know the Cavs did something similar against Charlotte where they sat Kevin Love in the fourth quarter. David Blatt asked Love to come in, and Love actually pointed out that the unit on the floor was playing very well and that they were gaining ground. So he had asked to stay out for as long as it was working, and eventually they were able to close out the game. So maybe there's some of that, but I think fourth quarter minutes are a big deal and something that the Wolves have to be giving to Karl-Anthony Towns.
Yeah, and I didn't know that story about Love. I mean, that's just really showing the maturity factor in him slowly becoming a veteran himself on that team. What did you want to bring up, man? There's so many stories going on right now.
Well, I mean, last night was a weird night in the NBA. The teams closest to my heart both played ugly games. Raptors and Wizards, revenge for the playoffs, let's call it. Just a sloppy, ugly game. They won on a Cory Joseph game-winning 3. There's a chance, looking at replay, that DeMar DeRozan stepped out of bounds when he was passing to Cory Joseph.
There were a lot of step out of bounds that last couple minutes of that game, which is something you rarely see. And what really stood out to me about that game and recently is John Wall.
I was just about to bring that up. He's been bad.
Yeah.
Well, bad for his standard.
And the thing is, I spoke to him in the preseason because they had a game here in Montreal, and I was talking to him about the MVP conversation because he has been out loud and up front about wanting to be in that conversation, saying he's healthy now for the first time in a long time, but he's just not singly himself. Like, why would you put yourself out there if you're not yourself? I don't really get it. There's a lot of question marks there.
Well, I think a lot of that talk was before the season, too. I don't think he foresaw this slow of a start. And I mean, some of it, I talking to a good friend of mine, Mike Sykes, who writes for Bullets Forever, good SB Nation Wizards blog, just talking about what it is. And I think there's a change. Like, their system has changed. They're shooting a lot more three-pointers. So he's passing for shots that are worth more but are lower percentage shots. So that might be a reason for the dip in his numbers there. He's also not getting to the rim the same way, and I don't know if there's an injury that he isn't disclosing, but he's really not attacking the basket, and I don't know if he's been watching too much Steph Curry, but he's launching a lot of really difficult shots in kind of isolation attempts. And for a guy that's not really a good shooter, these are really, really bad possessions. So I think the result of that is you're seeing a low percentage from the field. His points per game are down. His assists per game are down. He's shooting poorly from 3. The biggest concern to me, though, is when you watch him, he's not playing good defense, which is kind of his signature. And the Wizards, as a result of it, even though point guard defense doesn't typically impact team defense, when you're going small ball and you no longer have those bigs protecting the paint that you're used to, and you got John Wall who's allowing easy penetration, it's starting to really become a concern for the Wizards. So it's very strange to see. And I mean, he's at this point, he's not the best point guard in the conference. Kyle Lowry's playing at a much higher level. So I think the MVP talk was a little premature.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have a bit of a bad internet connection here, but I could make out what you're saying. And I like you were saying about Kyle Lowry. I mean, on that side of the fence, that he's doing really well. And I think it's really worth conversing about Cory Joseph, because the way he brings the second unit, like there's very little drop off when Cory Joseph comes on the court. And that shot he hit, I mean, that's the type of shot he's been hitting for Canada in the summers for years. I really see a lot of maturity and growth in him. And I think that's one of the steal pickups of the summer.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Spurs were obviously disappointed to have to let Cory Joseph go, but it was a necessity for adding LaMarcus Aldridge. So you make that swap every time, especially when you have two very good point guards in Tony Parker and Patty Mills. But yeah, Cory Joseph, someone that really impresses me. I don't think he's necessarily a starting caliber point guard. Maybe he develops into that one day, but he's exactly what you want in a backup. He's reliable. You know he's going to run the offense. He's not going to hijack it the same way Grievous Vasquez, Lou Williams, or other point guards of the past for the Raptors like Jared Bayless or Jared Jack. He's going to run the offense. He's going to take good shots. His handle is very you can tell he's studied under Tony Parker because he keeps the dribble alive in a very Tony Parker, Steve Nash kind of way, probing a lot, finishes well below the rim. These are kind of signature Tony Parker things, and you can tell that he's really benefited from being in that Spurs system. The three-point shot, he's shot it well in the past on very, very low volume. So he's selective with it, but we're starting to see him add it more and more to his game. The technique is sound, so we're really seeing mature beyond his years point guard that's blossoming into a very, very effective player for the Raptors, and I mean potentially a Sixth Man of the Year candidate.
Yeah, he is, and actually I got to give a shout out to Phil Boileau because he actually recommended him for Sixth Man of the Year at the start of the preseason, and he's really living up to the hype. A good friend of ours, Sam Esfandiari, I may be butchering his name, but he's a friend of ours out in the Bay Area, brought up a really interesting stat this weekend comparing Kawhi Leonard to Paul George's season. It's been a good debate. I mean, where do you stand on this? I mean, these guys could have potentially played together, but both having spectacular years.
The numbers are very similar. In a vacuum, looking at the numbers, I take what Kawhi Leonard is doing over Paul George. Turnovers are lower, just a little bit more efficient. But when you take the kind of the context of Kawhi playing within the Spurs system next to Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Tim Duncan, LaMarcus Aldridge, and the bevy of role players they have, and Paul George, who is playing on a team with no big men, integrating new pieces in Monte Ellis, very little depth. He's asked to do so much that I don't know if a Kawhi Leonard would be able to produce as efficiently as he is right now if he's asked to shoulder that kind of a load. So when someone does it, I don't want to say by themselves, but when they really take on that true number one option every single night role, I tend to give them a nod over a player that's kind of playing within the system more. Both players are playing out of their minds. I mean, it's not to take anything away from one, but if I'm looking at a tiebreaker, that's what would give Paul George the edge to me. I mean, he's playing at a level we haven't seen him play his entire career. He's better than he's ever been. So it's very, very good to see because we're looking at what is definitely two, I don't know if you want to call them new superstars, but they're solidifying their status as superstars in the NBA.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, the kind of career arcs. They're both coming off major injuries. Obviously, Paul's injury kind of lingers in our minds, just how, I guess, horrific it was seeing that live on national television. But seeing him play this year, and to be honest, I've only seen one or two games, the smoothness and the athleticism and the no hesitation in terms of how he plays, it's very rare to see an athlete come back
and just like you said, better than he was before. That's very rare. I mean, I've had doctors say in the past it's better to break a leg than get a fracture or a sprain or something like that. And this seems to be the case here. But coming back from nearly a year off, and then Kawhi with the hand injury that it basically took away most of a big chunk of last season at least. Seeing these guys come back strong, and like you said, both being two-way players, it's a very interesting dynamic between these two, and I think it's going to be something we're going to look at for years to come.
Oh, without a doubt. Like I said, they're blossoming superstars. They're going to be in the league for a long time, and they're going to be producing at a high level for a long time. Kawhi Leonard kind of seems destined to take the throne for the Spurs. Obviously, they're going to need to find some other young potential stars to put around him, the same way that they ended up doing with Tim Duncan once he was added to the David Robinson team. But when you're talking about a franchise cornerstone, he's about as good as he gets.
All right, so Matt Moore wrote a really great piece about the Spurs and how they evolve and change, kind of like an amoeba, just kind of flow with what needs to be done within the league that season, that trend of the year, and how they're kind of going, I guess, in reverse motion as everyone else is going small ball. They're going big ball and shooting long twos. How do you feel about Pop's change in direction?
I'm always fine with playing the style that suits your team best. I really think that, I mean, the Warriors dictate the pace of play and style of play so frequently, and that's something that makes them very good. I think if a team can play an alternate style, let's say a slower pace, and force them to change, it's going to get them out of their comfort zone. Now, it's yet to be seen which team would be able to dictate the style of play and the pace of play, but I mean, the Warriors' small ball lineup, their kind of closer lineup, well, they haven't really played a ton of great teams yet. I mean, the best teams they've played are Clippers and Rockets, and both of those teams are disasters right now. So they haven't faced a true test like, let's say, the Spurs or the Cavaliers. But that small ball lineup, their center is shorter than their shooting guard. I mean, Draymond Green is 6'5", 6'6", Klay Thompson 6'6", 6'7", Andre Iguodala is 6'6", Harrison Barnes is 6'8". So your small, or your, I guess in that lineup, that your power forward is your tallest guy at 6'8". If the Spurs are rolling out a team with Tim Duncan and LaMarcus Aldridge, that's going to be very tough for them to deal with. Now, of course, you give up something defensively. LaMarcus Aldridge isn't exactly a strong defender, and defending wing players would be a tall task for him. So it's really, both teams are giving up so much defensively in some way. It's just going to be a matter of if the Warriors are hitting their threes, which they so often do, versus being able to stop those guys and kind of post up and pick and roll possessions. So I'm really interested to see how teams match up against the Warriors once more film's out on them, how exactly they counter that small ball lineup, because right now it's the deadliest closer in the game.
Yeah, and to look for an example, I mean, Memphis was really banged up in the playoffs last year, but if you watch those first couple of games, they really gave the Warriors fits playing their old school brand of grinded out ball. That's worth watching. Got to point out as well, everyone's already hyping up this, the hyperbole of Golden State going for 33 straight wins, blah, blah, blah. But the Spurs facing Golden State in January, I wouldn't even circle that on my calendar, to be honest, because I think Pop will not show his cards and probably sit half of his starters, as he tends to do.
Without a doubt.
He did.
Obviously, I have Christmas circled on my calendar, not for the holiday, but because of Cavs Warriors. Cleveland should have both Kyrie Irving and Iman Shumpert back. Shumpert's apparently ahead of schedule and pushing for mid-December, so it'll be kind of the first test. I mean, we only saw these teams play at full strength once. There was a game in Golden State last regular season without LeBron James. Timofey Mozgov had just joined the team and then never had a practice with them, and it basically went down to the wire. And then there was the game in Cleveland where both teams had their full rosters, where the Cavs blew out the Warriors. And I think part of why the Cavs were able to hang around was, like I said, because they're able to dictate the pace of play. They play at such a slow style. They really take away those transition opportunities for the Warriors, and the Cavs can play small without going small. So really, it's two teams that are playing different styles, and just it's part of the beauty of the game. Like really the matchup battle and how these teams, which one's able to dictate the pace of play, the style of play, and all that. It's going to be so fascinating to watch. The result probably won't be too meaningful one way or the other, but it's really going to be quite the showcase for the league to see these two teams, hopefully at full strength, try to duke it out.
One team we haven't mentioned yet is OKC, and Kevin Durant has very quietly been putting up one heck of a season the last few weeks. Obviously, they've got a lot of firepower. What's your major issue with them so far this year?
Again, I really don't like their role players. I think there is a big gap at shooting guard. They have guys that can potentially be useful. Roberson's good defensively, but his offensive game is a bit of a nightmare. Dion Waiters is Dion Waiters. He could theoretically be an X factor, but he seems to get in his own way. Kyle Singler's a little bit disappointing. Enes Kanter, for how good he is offensively. You don't exactly want a high volume offense guy when Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook are on the floor. The offense is best running through them, which if you're not running the offense through Kanter, there's no sense putting him on the floor because of how bad he is defensively. I just don't like the supporting cast. I do think they have the talent to overcome it. They still are a legitimate contender just because they have two MVP candidates. But at the same time, there's just a lot of holes there, at least compared to the Warriors, who right now are kind of the cream of the crop in the NBA.
Yeah, I do think they have quite a bit of chemistry issues. Like I've said all along, it's not what you have on paper. It's how these guys interact with each other on the court, and the new coach as well. There's a lot of issues there. I was really fascinated by the post-game marks by both KD and Westbrook, both neglecting to mention Reggie Jackson as a former teammate after that game. Seems to be a lot of bitterness between them and their ex-teammate. Something you rarely see in the league.
I mean, yeah, Reggie Jackson wore out his welcome there. He didn't want to be part of the team, and he was vocal about that. And it also reflected in his actions on the court. And I think people understand disputes when it comes to the business side of the game. But when you're not contributing on the court and you're putting behind guys that considered you as a brother, they're going to be upset about that. So I don't necessarily blame them for them.
Yeah, I mean, and this has been this kind of last week or two. A lot of players-only meetings, like the Clippers had one. I mean, as we mentioned last week, Sacramento had one. The
Cavs had one, which LeBron was hilarious. I mean,
your point guard's out. Give me a break. I mean, you're undefeated at home. There's nothing to be urgently worried about.
Honestly, I brought this up on Twitter, and I really wish someone would have looked it up. But I think the Cavs might have had the best record for a team holding a players-only meeting. Like, they're 10 games above 500. And it was really, really funny to see kind of LeBron. I mean, he's going full. And actually, Sarat Sohi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Damian Trillard on Twitter. She's great,
by the way.
Yeah, she's a fantastic follow. And she kind of tweeted out that LeBron is going full process over results to try to trick this team into thinking they suck. I mean, really, they're missing 3 out of their 5 starters. He was upset at the bench guys who really are the 9th through 14th guys in the rotation who would never be playing if the team was healthy. I mean, they started Jared Cunningham, who is their 4th string point guard. and they lost to a decent team in Toronto. But it was just really, really funny to see him do that. I think, and I was talking to a couple people about this. I think him being so upset has more to do with him wanting to be MVP this season than it does being concerned about where the Cavs are at. I think he recognizes he needs a great record in order to get in the conversation for MVP. So he wants to keep pace with the Warriors.
Yeah, jealousy. I think jealousy plays a hand there. Gotta mention Jason Kidd. He got a bit upset. He's had some anger management issues in the past. You can't do that to an official if you're a player, especially if you're a coach. I'm surprised. Was it just a one-game suspension?
Mark. Honestly, he's one of the NBA's best all-time steals leaders. If you're the ref, you have to protect the ball. If you're the ref, you have to protect the ball a little bit better. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and you know what? I think during the season last year, someone asked him if he could still play, and he's like, "No, I can't play anymore." But yeah, I mean, he's he has his moments, and I remember last year where he did the thing with the dropping the glass, hit me on the ground. He's old school, and his antics sometimes get him in trouble. Milwaukee, how are you thinking these guys are looking so far? I mean, it's a lot of new players in the system. They dabbled even with Tyler Ennis playing starting point guard. I know you don't like Michael Carter very much. How you feeling him out so far?
Man, I don't like Tyler Ennis much better either.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I know the whole Canadian thing, but I don't think he's anything special, really. I think his physical limitations and how he translates to the NBA game is a little disappointing, but who knows? Hopefully he turns it around. Obviously, you kind of pull for any Canadian out there. Milwaukee's what I expected. Giannis has been better than I expected. I'll give him credit for that. But they're a team without any shooting. Their front court guys, with the exception of John Henson, don't play defense, so they're going a little bit away from their identity there. If I had to pick a team in the East to be the rival of the future for the Cavaliers, it'd be the Bucks. I love what they have, but there's still holes there. There's still a lot of youth there. I think it's a very real possibility that they do miss playoffs. But as Giannis, Chris Middleton, Greg Monroe, and of course Jabari Parker continue to evolve, I think you're looking at a core of a team that could contend if the right pieces are put around them. Just right now, the lack of interior defense and the lack of shooting, I hate teams without shooting. You can play inside to an extent, but when you only have one guy on the perimeter that shoots the three at a consistent rate, you're going to have a lot of spacing issues, especially for a team that wants to post up Greg Monroe. You're not going to get the spacing he needs to operate if you can't space the floor.
Yeah, I mean, Memphis has had the same issue long term. I mean, that's always an issue in the NBA. And I think with Milwaukee, they have a great young core, like you mentioned. Melding an identity, it's hard to say who is the alpha dog on that team. And when that happens, as we saw with Atlanta last year, it doesn't necessarily result in wins in the playoffs. So that's something they're gonna have to build going in the future, figure out who's going to be the number one. And like you said, they got to be able to score outside so they can score inside. It's a fundamental part of the game, as Charles Barkley always mentions. What else we got to bring up, man? It's like you said, it's been a lot going on this week.
I kind of talked about it a little bit with the Raptors hitting game winner. Cavs kind of had a similar thing. They played Brooklyn last night. Brooklyn hadn't played since Wednesday. Cavs were playing their fourth game in 6 nights. Ugly game. LeBron hit his 5th career regular season game winner. Kind of hit a sky hook over Brook Lopez from a few feet out. So that obviously they're happy with that result. Just kind of breaking news now. Harrison Barnes has a sprained ankle. He will be out for a few weeks. So obviously the Warriors will have to make a little bit of an adjustment there. And I guess for all the critics that wanted to see how they deal with an injury. At least there's one there. I don't think Barnes is too essential of a piece. I know we've spoken about that quite a few times. So it'll be interesting to see for a guy that wants a max contract. If there isn't a real drop off in the play from the Warriors, it's going to kind of hurt his leverage a little bit. So how do you think they're going to perform without Barnes?
Well, I mean, he does little things. He hits the corner three well. And he's not bad on D. I mean, the thing is they're deep. They're a really deep team. Guys are going to fill in. Draymond's going to do what he has to do. I don't think it's going to be a huge drop-off, to be honest. And they're clicking right now. They're a well-oiled machine, period. I don't think it's going to be a major issue unless there's other injuries. And like I said a few weeks ago, I think there will be major injuries on this team because of the law of averages. So we'll see as team goes along. I don't want to talk about this 33-game streak. I don't think they're going to get there. If they do, it'll be a freaking miracle, to be honest, because just to have everything go well every single night of the week is very rare in this league or any sports league in the world. So I don't even want to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, they almost lost to Brooklyn at home. Brooke Lopez had kind of
chippy.
Had a little chippy where you could have made a case for Andrew Bogut pushing him from behind as well. So honestly, I just don't see all the stars aligning. They have a ton of road games, Cavs on Christmas as well. Who knows? I mean, maybe they go undefeated until Christmas, but guys have off nights. I just can't see it happening, but there is a theoretical possibility when you play that good, which, I mean, the Warriors are historically good at this point. But like I said, it's a matchup thing. I mean, maybe you go a little bit cold against Indiana on the road and Paul George just kind of asserts himself on the game, or Paul George. I mean, Indy's actually a pretty interesting case there, because I really think if you do try to take away Steph Curry, like if you put Paul George and say anybody else beat us. I mean, if you're dealing with a 6'10" guy guarding you and you're Steph Curry, I mean, maybe you're able to create separation because of his ball handling, but I think the wear and tear on him throughout the night, I think you might be able to stifle their offense a little bit. So that's going to be a game I'm really interested to see. I mean, outside of that, I can't think of too many things we haven't touched on, but it certainly has been an eventful week in the NBA. And I'm kind of looking forward to this next week. I mean, we're